Today we're going to be looking at and installing the C&L Racer cold air intake for 2018 GT Mustangs. This is a tune-required intake for 2018 GT Mustangs that eliminates any kind of air filter housing. It has a separate cast aluminum mass airflow housing, and it's very easy to install. So a stock dyno run on a manual 2018 GT gave us numbers of 433 horsepower and 390 foot-pounds of torque. After we installed the C&L cold air intake and paired it with a VMP custom tune, we saw numbers of 455 horsepower and 398 foot-pounds of torque. That makes for a peak gain of 22 horsepower and 8 foot-pounds of torque. What's even more impressive than that, though, are our curve gains. We saw curve gains of 26 horsepower at 6,700 RPM and 20 foot-pounds of torque, both at 3,200 RPM and again in the upper RPM range at 6,700 RPM. I'll call it a 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, and I'll show you how to get it on the car now. To start the install, you will need to remove the strut tower brace. You'll have to pop off those two 15mm nuts so you can get to your engine cover. You'll remove this little plastic cap that's holding your wire harness so you can get to this nut. All right, we're going to do the same thing over here. So because your wire harness is over there, I'd recommend sliding your strut tower off this side first, and then lift off on the other side. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to want to pop these two covers off of your engine cover. That'll reveal two 10mm nuts that you'll need to back out so you can pop your engine cover off. I'm just going to do this with a flathead screwdriver, and I'm going to leave the nut sitting in the cover. I'll just be careful when I pop this off to make sure that the nuts don't go flying out. All right, so now at this point, your engine cover is just going to snap out of place. It's held in by two little rubber grommets, so you'll just pull up. Next, I'm going to loosen the clamp at the throttle body with a 7mm socket. From here, I'm going to disconnect the connections that are on the intake tube here. So for this first one, the way this works is you'll push, and then once you push this clip, you'll be able to push it down and pull off. So we use a pair of pliers to release the clamp on the sound tube. So if you're lucky, you can get the clamp on the sound tube to lock, which will then free you to pull it off a little bit easier. All right, your next connection has a little bit of a different clamp on it, so you'll find the tab, press down on that tab to release, and you'll be able to just slide the line right off. Next, we'll undo the mass airflow sensor. So there is a little red locking tab on the bottom that you'll release here. Pull the red tab out, your sensor will release. Now on the 2018 Mustang, you will need a body panel removal tool to remove this clip from the airbox. So we'll pop our body clip out. Lastly, we'll remove the 10mm bolt that's holding the airbox into place on the fender here. After that, I'm going to try to lift this entire intake out as one piece. So I'm going to slide the intake tube off at the throttle body first. Real quick, if we take a look at the C&L intake on the table here and compare it to our stock intake, you see a lot of differences. The C&L really is a basic intake, so it's molded more after performance, I'd say. It's a lot like the PMAS intake in the sense that you don't have an airbox any longer. So there's no cold air feed anymore, there's no airbox. You're literally just getting your rotomolded plastic intake tube, a mass airflow housing, and a reusable oiled filter here. Your big changes are going to be your reusable filter. So this is an oiled filter, and what this means is that you can just clean this filter, re-oil it, and reinstall it. You don't have to buy a brand new filter every time like you would have to do with the paper filter of the stock intake. The other thing is the C&L intake does have a separate aluminum mass airflow housing, which is a little bit different than a lot of the other designs that you see out there. So like your stock intake has your mass airflow sensor built into your intake tube like most other cold air intake options. This isn't a good thing or a bad thing, it's actually more like a styling thing in my opinion, and I think this looks pretty good under the hood. One thing I will say right now is the C&L Racer intake is a tune required intake, so you can't just install this and go, you will need to pair this with a tune. Now we're going to move on to assembling the C&L cold air intake on the table here before we drop it in place in the car. So you can fully assemble this intake because of the style that it has. You can fully assemble the intake before you drop it in. C&L gives you a torque spit, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove the mass airflow sensor from the factory intake tube. C&L provides you 2 Phillips head screws as new hardware for the mass airflow sensor, so we're just going to transfer this over into the new MAF housing. Alright, so now we're going to get the couplers onto the intake tube so we can assemble the intake. So the smaller coupler is going to go on the throttle body side, and we are first going to make sure we have clamps on here. And you're just going to slide it in place. Now these are a tight fit, so it may take a little bit of working to get this on there. You'll slide it down into place, and there are different size clamps. Your 2 smaller clamps are going to go at the throttle body end, and your 2 larger clamps are going to go at your air filter end, or your mass airflow sensor end actually. So we'll just slide these on. And I'm actually going to rotate the clamps now so they're in a good position when I want to tighten them. From here we can then slide the mass airflow sensor housing into place. So we'll slide that on our coupler. I'm rotating the mass airflow sensor housing so that the mass airflow sensor is oriented in the correct way, because when you install this on the car, you need the sensor to be facing this way so you can make your electrical connection. You don't want it pointing up or pointing anywhere else. You kind of want it right in line with the intake tube. So you just want to get the clamps in a position where they have a good grip on the coupler and then tighten them down. Alright, and same thing with this clamp. You just want to make sure your housing is pushed all the way in and your clamp's in a good position before you tighten it down. Alright, so we're just going to tighten our other clamp as well before we get our air filter into place. If you're installing this intake on a manual car like we are today, C&L gives you a supplied cap, and you're going to cap off the 3rd line on the intake tube right here. If you're installing on an automatic car, you won't need to do this because you'll have a line that will connect here. So from here, we're now going to attach our air filter onto the mass airflow housing. So we'll slide that into place and we'll just tighten our clamp down now. So we're going to take our last remaining clamp, slide it on the throttle body end here, and we are ready to get the intake installed on the car. Alright, so now we're going to get our intake in place. We're going to slide the coupler over the throttle body first. Make sure that's seated well and flush against the throttle body. So once you have your intake tube and coupler flush against your throttle body, you can tighten your clamp. Next, we'll plug in all of the connections on the intake tube itself. They'll just snap into place. We'll connect the sound tube, then release our clamp. So now we'll just plug back in our mass airflow sensor, slide it into place, and make sure to push down that locking tab. So now we'll get the engine cover back into place and bolt it down, followed by the strut tower brace. So we'll sit this on here first, and then we want to make sure that our little rubber grommets are seated and in place. All right, so now we'll drop the 10mm nut in place. Tighten it down. These don't need to be too tight. All right, so now we're going to clip our covers back into place. All right, so now we'll get our strut tower brace into place, and I will say that it might be helpful to have a second set of hands here. I would recommend sliding that end in first since you are going under that harness. And then we'll just lay this end in place. take our nuts, get them started by hand, and then we'll tighten them down. At this point, you're done with the mechanical portion of the install. Don't forget, before you try to start your car, to upload your tune, since this is a tune-required intake. That's going to wrap up this review and install. For all things Mustang, make sure you keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.